Hi, I'm Dr. Kelly Kessler, and I am the host of the podcast Rewiring Health. This podcast is devoted to giving you expert information around nervous system regulation, subconscious mind reprogramming, and a variety of health topics so that you can optimize your life. Stop feeling burnt out, overwhelmed, in pain, and start living your life where you can remain successful without compromising your health. Have you ever felt like a prisoner in your own mind? Do you feel like you're living with constant thoughts of never feeling enough, trying to make everyone else happy, and the pressure of making every little detail in life perfect? If you answered yes to any of these or all of these, stick around for this episode. I have the pleasure of speaking with Megs about how to live life free from the beliefs that bind us. Megan Gibson is a life alignment coach, podcaster, and author. An expert in the transformative journey of deep self-discovery, Meg's specially formulated one-on-one process guides individuals to uncover deeply held intrinsic values and unique gifts. As a mother of grown-up children, she understands the importance of leading by example in a world that lacks authenticity and vulnerability. Through the Free to Be You podcast, Megan inspires women to imagine a life and business where they no longer have to pretend to be something they're not. Instead, she empowers us to embrace our authentic selves, step out of self-abandonment, and into full expression. As a speaker, Megan shares profound insights and practical tools for unlocking personal clarity and emphasizes the importance of aligning one's life and business with your values, vision, and enabling you to take ownership and create the life you desire. Have you checked out this week's giveaway? With over $1,700 in the next 5 weeks for my countdown to 100 episodes, these are such amazing prizes that you can win from past guests. If you haven't checked out this week's giveaway, just check it out in the details below and definitely enter so you can win. Welcome back to another episode of Rewiring Health. So excited for this conversation. So welcome Megan Gibson to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yes. And so we had connected and we shared similar mindsets in the past. And so I want to dive into this because it not only impacts us, but impacts so many people out there, especially women. So do you mind sharing your story with perfectionism, people pleasing, and how that evolved in your life?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I want to start at the beginning because I feel like that is so important for us to actually uncover. But like as a child, was so hyper aware of how the adults around me were feeling that I always wanted to please them. I always wanted to be the one that made them happy. I got so much joy out of seeing them happy and knowing that I had something to do with that. That just seemed to be the way that I showed up really, really early. Now, obviously, that's fine and endearing when you're little, but as I got older, that wasn't always the response I got. So the more I got sort of any kind of negative feedback, the harder I would try. And so I was like just the ultimate good girl, like right through all my childhood, right through school. I never really stepped out of line. I was never game enough to upset anybody. And so this, I've really dug into like the origin of that and why that is. I know exactly where it started, right down to the moment. And I think that it has really helped me to overcome it. But like how that showed up in my life was I would put everybody ahead of me, everybody's needs ahead of mine, and everybody's happiness ahead of mine more than anything. And I believed that that would make me, one, happy, and two, good enough for the people around me. And unfortunately, as I got older and got into the real world, as we call it, right, where I started interacting with people outside of my immediate circle, going to work, being in high school, having other adults around me, I collected evidence that would show me that I wasn't enough, which would in turn just exacerbate this story. And so that became my reality for a really long time. And I really didn't get past that until I was in my late 30s, early 40s is where I really started kind of really unpacking that and uncovering what was causing me to be that way.
Mm.
And it really affected a lot of my relationships and some of my most important relationships. And so, that's where I've been on a big journey back from that to the work that I do now, using the work that I do now, but it's really been something that I've really struggled with. And the perfectionism part of it is it's like an additional thing. Like the people pleasing is one thing, but having everything be perfect was kind of like the added layer. It was like, well, if I can be happy with it, and if I think that it's perfect, then everyone else is going to think that. And unfortunately, that's not the case. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's kind of like where it started and what it kind of showed up like for me. But with what I hope people only uncover, Kel, is like, can I call you Kel?
Oh yeah, that's
I
fine.
tend naturally
Okay.
shorten people's names. Feel
100%. I
free to
love it.
shorten mine. Um,
I love
but
it.
like what I naturally tend to do is, yeah, like I'd step into that, and then I would find myself in a place where I would just be miserable. And then I would start to blame myself. And it's just this cycle that will continue. So what I've helped people do is to do exactly what I've just explained. Uncover where that started, unpack why it happens, more importantly, like free themselves from this constant evidence collecting that
Mhm.
we're on, and
Yeah.
just understand that it's not going to go away. We need strategies to be able to deal with it in a way that we can turn around so that it serves us. Now, there's actually a lot of good things about being someone who likes to please other people. It makes you very likable, but it's the thing that's driving it that we need to get right.
Oh my gosh, yes. And everything you said, I'm like, I can resonate with that so much. And I'm sure almost every woman who's listening or man could resonate with that too, because it is so it's so ingrained in many of us, that mentality. And I love that you went back and really found the origin of that, because once we bring awareness to it, it can't grow as it does. And
Yeah.
one thing that stuck out to me is that evidence, that you were collecting evidence. And that's what our brain does, is like we have these beliefs and then it collects evidence and it's like, oh, well, it must be true. There's evidence. And so I
Yeah.
love that you talk about that. Can you dive into that more? Like, how do we start to change how we're thinking when we've had these limiting beliefs? Now we've collected evidence for maybe 10, 20, 30 years. How do we start to unravel that mindset and go into one that's actually serving us?
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, we need the self-awareness piece is the biggest piece.
Mhm.
We need to understand like why we do that, and how first of all how it's not serving us, but then how we can unpack it, repack it in a way that is going to serve us moving forward. So one of the things that I think is really important is rediscovering, or for some people it's discovering for the first time, the things that are actually important to them, because we tend to know it on a subconscious level, but it's not something we can be intentional about until we make it tangible by bringing awareness to it. What I mean by that is our core values. So not the things that, if I was to say, what are your core values, and I asked somebody to make a list, they would list all these things that they probably like and would like more of, and they would be very high level. But if we go really deep and we uncover, like, for instance, freedom is a big value. I mean, my business and my podcast called Free to Be You, right? So I'm big on this whole freedom piece. But freedom, to me, when I talk about freedom, is very different than someone who would perhaps say, oh, I like freedom. To me, I love adventure. I love getting out. Like, that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm talking about freedom of ourself, like personal freedom. So if we were to dig deeper into that, what that means for each individual person, just that one value of freedom, which we all want freedom, right? No one wants to be stuck. If we dig into that individually with each person, it's going to be unique. And so in the same way, I use that as an example to say that in the same way, if we were to dig into, like, where is this story coming from? Like, what does it actually mean? Like, what's underneath it? And bring awareness to that. Then we can start to also go, well, okay, but there's actually some really good things down there as well. Like, a lot of our core values are solidified or start to be ingrained in us, sadly, through the things that don't go well.
Mhm.
Like, we start to uncover not the feeling of not having something and craving it can make something very meaningful to us if that was a theme and a pattern that's repeatedly happening throughout our lives. So, it's not, there's not just sort of the things that we like and the things that we want. Our core values are innate because of the things we've been through. And so is this story about being enough or not.
Yeah.
It is unique to us. And so when we can really understand it at a very deep level, it's easier to let it go.
Yeah. Oh
It's
my God.
easier to see the truth in it. And along with doing that, we uncover all this other amazing gold that we can also be intentional about, like your values and other things. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's that's where I would start with people, is like doing that unpacking. Like, let's figure out what's really unique to you and what's happening in there. Like, who are you? If someone
Yeah.
asks who you are, who am I? It's a really big answer, a
Mhm.
lot bigger than it used to be.
Yes.
There's
And
a lot of awareness there.
yeah, I love that. I love that last piece you said, because a lot of times when we ask, oh, who we are, who are you? It's your occupation. You label yourself,
Yeah,
oh,
it's what we do.
yes. And it's like,
Yeah.
that is not who you are. So I love that. And I love how you said it expands. The more you understand yourself, the more it expands, because we are so much. And it's like we put ourselves in this box, or we just minimize who we are as a being. And it's like, I love that. And then just diving in deep and understanding ourselves. Like, how many people stop to actually take a moment to do that? And the thing
Yeah.
that's really the big problem is that we do go on autopilot. We believe that our mindset is serving us. We believe it, even though it's not. And then we just continue to ride the wave of that. And we see
Yeah.
it pop up in our life. And a lot of times, many times we will say, oh, why is the world against us? And yet it's all coming from within us. It's, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely amazing. Do you mind
Yeah.
talking about, I know you had touched on earlier about how it impacted your relationships. Do you mind going into that a little further and how that
Yeah.
actually impacted your relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I go back to that gathering evidence piece,
Mhm.
so it doesn't matter which area of your life you look at, but if we do look at your relationships, so one of the things that I realized is it creates this sense of needing to defend yourself
Mhm.
when you don't get the response you want. So, it creates, you mentioned when we chatted last time, you mentioned that shame that comes up. So like, if we do something and it doesn't go well, or we upset somebody that we love, and I'm talking about an actual experience here. This has actually happened to me, right? So, you upset somebody, you know that your intention was pure, but for whatever reason, it's not taken that way. Your immediate response is going to be to defend yourself, to go into that like fight or flight, to have a response that try to stop what's happening
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so we tend to reflect that out, and it can come across very defensive. And so rather than us, seeing it for what it is, all of a sudden it's this really big deal. And so, trying to be perfect, trying to avoid those things happening is really exhausting.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Really, really exhausting. So
Yeah.
over a long period of time, if it's like, I mean, I can be really specific and say that, the longest relationship that I had outside of my own family was my marriage, and that lasted 28 years. And I met him when I was 15.
Oh,
So I was a baby.
yeah.
We both were, right? And at 15, I was somebody who was extremely anxious, extremely really in the thick of that whole people pleasing mode that I mentioned before. and trying to, like, my parents were separating at the time. That took them 8 years to actually separate. So it was a really long period of time where the people that I cared about the most were not happy, and not being able to do anything about that and not being able to affect that situation. You can imagine, like, with everything I've shared so far, how that really affected me, because I wanted to be able to have an impact on that. I wanted those two people that I loved to be happy and to be together, and I couldn't change that. So then when I then got a relationship, or got into a relationship, which was around that same time, I immediately started playing out like that in my own relationship. So I would be constantly in fear that he was going to leave me, or that I wouldn't be enough. And so I was an over functioner.
Mm.
I overfunctioned in every relationship that I ever had for a really, really long time. And it just became who I was. It isn't who I am, but it became who I was being. And so, yeah, like, that's one of the biggest things that I found, is just that immediate a need to defend.
Mm.
And and I don't know if anyone listening has had that been on the receiving end of that. It's really hard to try and break through that and have someone hear you
Yeah.
when they're in that mode.
Mm-hmm.
And as the person in that mode, it's really, really hard to hear anything else that's being said, because that voice in your head is so loud that you can't even hear your true self. You're just
Yeah.
hearing that negative self-talk. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can totally relate to that. And it's like the more someone says that that's not right, the louder it gets, and the
Yeah.
more almost angered you get, because you're like so hell bent on defending yourself. And but yet I don't know if you experienced this, like deep down you know that you know that that's not true, but it's like just keeping up that front.
Well, it's that shame, right? It's
Yeah.
that shame that comes up. And, it's taken me a long time. I mean, when I say a long time,
Yeah.
it's taken me a good few years of, like, really being focused on this to get to a point where I feel like now, like, I can feel it in my body before it's in my head. And
Mhm.
that's where we've got to get to. And I know this is something that, is really close to your heart, is like, we have to be in touch with our body and how we feel in order to feel that stuff coming on, because it definitely is in the body before it's in the head, I think. Like, I know when I'm getting anxious now. Like, I did suffer with anxiety for a long time for obvious reasons.
Mhm.
Any people around me would have known? No way. There's no way I would have told anybody that. But I didn't know that until I really started figuring out what this was about for me. And so I learned to feel when I'm getting upset about something, or anxious, or like anxiety about something. I'm like, okay, there's something going on in my subconscious that I'm not aware of. So it's like the trigger to go, okay, what's actually happening here? And it almost like, well, the thing that I've learned to do is to slow down, like, just try to slow everything down.
Yeah.
Because when we're in that fight flight mode, we just want to move through it, like run away, make it pass as quickly as possible. And we end up saying things we don't mean, and we end up behaving in a way that we're not proud of, which puts you straight back on the same cycle.
Yeah, 100%. And how long because a lot of times when we experience that, like, especially like the people pleasing perfection, it's like we're almost shut down our body's responses. We shut down anything that's telling us not to be that. How did you get to where you could be in tune with yourself rather than suppressing those those signals from your body?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways it can be done. For me personally, I have found that it happened simultaneously with me learning more about myself. So the more I understood understood where this stuff was coming from, the more that I dug into what is actually me and let go of the things that are not me,
Mhm.
the more tangible that stuff became. By that, I mean, when we put language around something, it becomes a real thing. If we can get it out of our head and give it words, give it, like, solidity, if
Mhm.
that's even a word, like,
Yeah.
make it real by languaging it, it becomes tangible, and it then becomes something that we can move towards and something that we can live into. And so I found personally that that was a big thing for me. And purely because that was the work that I was already doing. I got into the coaching space about 8 years ago. I started in the personal branding space, just actually helping people uncover a really authentic brand by figuring out who they are. What I found personally from doing that work, and also what a lot of the feedback I got from the people I worked with, was that that actually impacted their personal life and their relationships more than their business.
Mm-hmm.
And I got really, really passionate about that around the same time that this all started to come to a head.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When this all started to become something that broke down in order for me to break through. So, because that's the only way that I
All
think we
happens for a
really,
reason, like those breadcrumbs of
yeah,
what you're meant to do. Yeah.
totally. Yeah. And so I really started to believe and understand that if we can uncover more of who we are, that we can then be more intentional about the choices that we make. Now, obviously, I went through the darkest times of my life simultaneously while this was going on, while I was doing that work. But I am the type of person, I always have been, I don't do anything by halves. Can go against you sometimes, but I don't do anything by halves. And that's kind of that perfectionism, I suppose, that kicks in there a little bit sometimes. But I am somebody who's all in.
Mm-hmm.
So as a coach, how that has me show up is that I am not somebody that's going to be teaching or telling somebody to do something that I'm not doing myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was really, really, really fortunate to be doing the work that I was doing and be surrounded by other people who are in that same space that I was working with collectively as a group, who are able to hold space for me to go through that time and continue to uncover more of who I am. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do now, Cal, because I believe that if we can rediscover our sense of self in those times, then we can be really, really intentional about how we come out the other side of it and the choices we make from there.
Yeah.
So for me, like a lot of the people that listen to my podcast, or even the women that I work with, they're sort of in their 40s and their kids are older, and they find themselves with more time and perhaps have put themselves, last in order to look after their family. And if you add people pleasing to that, like for me, that was even more of a void for me to transition through when my kids were older and they didn't need that level of care or that amount of, that capacity from me. So at the same time as my kids were getting older, my relationship ended as well. So massive, massive gulf of time that I suddenly found myself with, that I had to kind of go through and reinvent and rediscover who I was going to be without those things. Now, I'm still a mum, obviously, but my kids are older. They're in their late teens. So, it's a different time for me. And I know that that can be a time where people can really start to, come up against the things that are in the way of them stepping into who they are. And one of them is people pleasing. And one of them is, that's one of the things we're jamming on today. But there's many, many, many stories that I find people end up realizing they've been living into for a long time.
Yeah, 100%. And I love just how you talk about that, your own awareness with that, and then, just really just diving into that. And one thing that as you're speaking, I know you're saying you don't do things in halves, like you're all in. How do you navigate that now? Because I know, like, as a perfectionist in my past life, and a people pleaser, like it doesn't just like go away. Like we have to keep it in check. How do you keep that in check for yourself though, so that, you can still be successful and do things, at a high caliber, but not get to the point where you're getting into those limiting mindsets?
Yeah. Oh, so good. So boundaries. I know we talk about this a lot, but like boundaries is where it's at. So you can't have a boundary around something that you don't have awareness around. So again, like that's why that's the first piece for me. But then in order to move past that, and for me, it's like I've and even say that in the last couple of years, like I've found myself not starting something or not moving something on because I wanted it to be at a certain stage or look a certain way in order for me to even put it out there.
Yeah.
And my podcast was one of them. I
Mhm.
was like, I actually recorded the first 6 episodes of my podcast 2 years ago, and I only put it out this year
Oh my gosh.
because I was like, for whatever reason, I just didn't feel like they were good enough. Now, there was obviously a few things, other things that contributed to that, timing wise and whatever, but really, if I'm honest with myself, I could have done it anyway. It's
Mhm.
just not how I am. So
Yeah.
I have the awareness around it. I can own that. So
Mhm.
that's another big thing, is just like owning it. It's like, I know exactly why that didn't happen. That's
Mhm.
on me. If I want something different, then I have to make a different choice.
Mhm.
So there's that. The other thing is that I I don't do things that I know I'm going to be a perfectionist about. So,
Mhm.
like, for instance, I've just rebranded and got a brand new website, which I'm in love with. I
Mhm.
didn't build it, even though I know that I could have done that. That is a skill set that I have, that I could have done that on my own. But I know that I would have just obsessed over the detail, and it
Yeah.
would have taken twice as long.
Mhm.
And I would have given myself a really hard time about it, and probably still would be. But because I got somebody else to do it for me, I was in love with it immediately.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
So knowing those things about, again, it's that self-awareness. It's so putting boundaries around what you're going to apply yourself to, so that you can stop yourself. Like, when you know the things that set you off, you
Mhm.
don't put yourself in a situation where that's going to happen.
Yeah.
You can
That's so
be more
great.
intentional about your boundaries.
Yeah, I love that. And it's just and being okay with that, because I sometimes
Yeah.
when you're that like high achiever perfectionist, it's like I need to do it myself. Like, no one
Yeah.
can do it as good as I can. So I love that you
So true.
relinquish some of those responsibilities onto someone else who maybe that's their strength, and you have strengths in different ways. And it's like that what a sign of healing in your journey that you were able to do that. And it's like, and then again, it's evidence that like it came out great, it still came out
Yeah.
good.
Well, that's right. You
Yeah.
start collecting evidence in a different way. So that is a really good point you just made there. I just learned something. So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, the evidence is, then you're collecting it
Mhm.
in the outcome of that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't do it, but I love it. So that's a
Yeah.
good thing. And one of the things I love, I don't know if you know the movie Mary Poppins, but I
Mhm.
watched it 1,000
Yeah.
times when I was a kid because Mary
Mhm.
Poppins is amazing.
It's
But
fun.
like, I love how she says, like, perfectly imperfect in every way.
Oh my
That
gosh,
is my
yes.
new goal.
Yes.
Like, good is better than perfect, because good is done, perfect is
Mhm.
probably still on the way, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Oh my gosh. And I also like how you said that you recorded your podcast episodes and didn't post them, because it's that you get stuck in these traps. Like, it's like you literally paralyze yourself when you think that it
Yeah.
has to be a certain caliber. And it's like when you start seeing that you're holding yourself back because of this, it's like you're doing a disservice to yourself. So it's like I love how you shared that, because I know I've experienced that in my life where I'm like I wouldn't start things because unless it was perfect. Like literally journaling was one of those things. I'm like I knew journaling was good, but I wouldn't start because I'm like, well, I wouldn't write the way it needs to be. I wouldn't perfectly
Yeah.
capture. And it's like it's a journal, you're the only one reading it, but it literally like this is like the mindset you get stuck in. So no, I
Yeah.
I, I absolutely love that. It's so good. And one thing I don't know if this came up when our previous conversation or I saw this, but can you talk about self-abandonment? Because that's just that term, it's I feel like it captures a lot of things that people experience and
Yeah.
maybe don't even realize that it's that because they're so used to it and it's become normalized. Can you experience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So self-abandonment as a word, right, as a
Mhm.
term, is us abandoning our sense of self.
Mhm.
So we're putting ourselves last.
Mhm.
We're abandoning the things that we need
Mhm. Mhm.
in order to be at our best, or in order to be functioning in a way that allows us to give more of ourselves. Like, we can't give from an empty cup.
Mhm. Yeah.
But if we abandon ourselves and we don't give to ourselves, that essentially is what we're doing. We're draining our own cup.
Mhm.
And then we're trying to give from an empty cup. And if we come back around to the health side of things, like what, that's a big part of your work. It's like, well, if your cup is already empty and you're still giving and you're still over functioning,
Mhm.
that's why I said earlier, you're going to be exhausted, and you're going to be, the interesting thing is that you end up in a place where you start to do more of the things that you don't want to do, like being snappy or being, you know what I mean? And when
So
you've got little
true.
ones,
Yeah.
that can be so easy to do.
Hmm.
And so the other thing that happens when we live in a place of self-abandonment is that we start to resent the people that we're giving to.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not something that is easily undone.
Hmm.
So that's definitely another thing that really affected my relationships. Relationship in particular was the fact that, you know, you're giving so much of yourself, and it's your choice to do it.
Yeah.
And then you end up resenting the people that you're giving to because it's not reciprocated in the same way.
Mm. Oh my gosh, yes.
Right.
I can
So
totally resonate. Yes.
yeah. So it's like
Hmm.
this, you start to become this like keeping score and all these
Hmm.
things. And it's not the way that it should be. If
Yeah.
you're a giver, you're a giver.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. But
So good.
again,
So good.
yeah.
Yeah.
But again, like you can still be somebody that's giving, but
Hmm.
we need to understand where that drive is coming from. So we cannot give to everybody else if we're not giving to ourselves. So when I talk about self-abandonment as well, I don't always think that it's a bad thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes, like as a mum, we do need to put our children first,
Mhm.
especially when they're small, because they need us. They need us to be, we need to feed them. We need to make sure they get enough sleep. We need to we need to take care of their needs. So, of course, there's a natural level of abandoning our own needs in order to care for our children. But at some point, we do need to give to ourselves, and we need to replenish our cup so that we can do it all again the next day.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one thing that really like struck me. I'm like, I feel like it was like the eye opener. It's like as you said it, I'm like, oh man, that made it so clear because I've experienced that where it's like I was giving, 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 and you do become resentful of the people you're giving to, and then but like you know deep down like why is that coming up? But it makes so much sense when you are giving from an empty cup. You're like, I only have like an ounce of energy and I'm giving you everything I have. How is that not enough? And
Yeah.
it's not the
More
person's fault.
evidence.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense. And it's like I've experienced that, but when you say it like that, I'm like, yes, that was exactly what I was going through. And it's
Yeah.
like, and then you're like, well, why am I resentful to this person? Like I chose to help them, but yeah, why is there's like this other voice saying like, you know, making you feel that way? It's
Yeah.
amazing how the brain and the mind, like how they all operate to change like our perception of things, and we see life through a different lens when we're taking care of ourselves versus not taking care of ourselves. It's like literally life
Mhm.
changes when you change. It's
Yeah,
so true. Oh my gosh,
definitely.
I love that. For anyone who wanted to connect with you, how can they find you? How can they reach out to you?
Yeah. So well, there's a couple of things.
Mhm.
Based on what we just talked about, if anyone is interested, I have a really fun, light-hearted way of uncovering what that story is,
Mm.
if you'd like to.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
called the Freed from BS quiz. It's about 8
love it.
questions. It will take you a couple of minutes to take. But what it does is uncover the shit story. Can I
Yes.
say that?
Yeah, that's fine.
The story like
Yeah.
that you've been believing this whole time. Now, obviously, there's like hundreds of things that you could be saying to yourself, but there tends to be, in my experience of working with people, around 5 that have a variation of these 5 results. So it'd be interesting to see which one you
So
have come up, the
interesting.
lie that you
Yeah.
tell yourself. So that's one way you can get in touch with me. But you can find that, I mean, I can give you the link to that, but you can find
Yeah.
it on my website. It'll pop up and tempt you anyway at
Uh-huh.
freetobeyu.com.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if anything that I've said has resonated, I believe that, and I'm sure you agree with this too, you need to find your person. This is
Mhm.
really deep work. It takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of letting your walls down and being vulnerable. And so it's really important that you have the opportunity to check in and make sure that the person you do this work with is the right person for you. So I always offer the people a chance to have a chat like we're having now, not recorded. We're not going to share it with
Yeah.
anyone, but just a private chat, just to make sure that I'm that
Yeah.
person. I'm the right person to stick in the navigator seat and put you back in the driver's seat of your life, essentially.
Yes, so important. And you have to find someone who you resonate with, because if there's resistance with that person, nothing's going to happen. You're just going
No.
to be, you're going to be fighting each other, and like what
Yeah.
you resist persists. And so I love that. And I love your quiz. Like I haven't taken it, but like what a great way to bring that self-awareness to what's going on in your life, and uncovering those stories is so difficult. So it's so interesting that you find that people kind of end up in these categories of it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
not only the lie, but like we give that voice a name.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so important, because now you can remove yourself from it. Like instead of saying, what's
Yeah.
wrong with me? Now you can say, okay, this is how my mind is working. And
Yeah.
now you can start moving into it. Yeah. I
Yeah.
just love that. And it's like, I find no matter where you are in your stages of healing, like I am a heck of a lot better than I was like 10 years ago, but there's always work to be done with this. There's always work to keep moving yourself forward. So, no matter where you are, keep pushing forward and keep exposing those things that are holding you back in life. So thank you, Megs. This has been such a great conversation. So many golden nuggets from this, and just eye-opening things that, I've learned something from you today, and I'm sure our listeners have too. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I could talk about this for a long time.
Yes.
As you can see, no problem talking.
That's it. And it's like when it impacts you so deeply, it's like you
Yeah.
want to share it. You're like, this is how I got through it. Like you can too. And it's, I really hope that anyone listening to this is really taking that message. Like, even if you've lived with this for 40, 50 years and you feel like there's no way out, there is. You can move and be free, like you say, free in life to do what you want to do, and feel the way you want to feel. So thank you again. And again, share this episode with someone. Maybe you have a friend, a family member who really needs to hear it. Like maybe there was a message in here that, they're struggling with, and it might not be necessarily received great from someone who's close, but when you share these messages, sometimes it hits a little differently. So share it with someone who you feel like would really benefit from this. And again, thank you for listening to this episode, and please subscribe to the podcast so you can get more like this. So thank you so much. Thank you for spending your precious time to listen to this episode of Rewiring Health. My mission is to inspire hope and healing through science-backed practices. If you found value in this, please share with 3 people and leave a review. By doing so, this message can be spread to those who need to hear it most. Also, to get updates on the most recent episodes, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for being part of this community, and I am forever grateful for you.